So welcome again. Thanks for joining us. I know that there are a million other things that you could be doing. I'm sure your days are very busy, but we're really thankful that you are here with us today. Without taking a lot of time, I will just go ahead and share my screen. Just going to talk very briefly about some housekeeping items. You've done this for 18 months, and I think we're all being better at muting ourselves when we're not speaking, so please continue to do that. Please continue to add your questions, comments, or anything in the chat box. This session is being recorded, and it will be available to you to share with your colleagues after the event, and we will let you know when it's ready, and we will send it out to you. Our last event in this series of Beginning Your DEI Journey will be on August 26th, where we will be talking about how do you strategize. In the first session, we talked very basic information about diversity, equity, inclusion. Today, we're going to dive in a little bit more deeper into what's diversity, what's equity, what's inclusion, what's the business case, why do we need to talk about it? And in the next session, we will be talking a lot more about strategies. How do you build a good DEI strategy? How do you measure some of the work that you're doing? So put that on your calendar. We'll be sending out information about it. So this is our agenda today. We'll be talking a little bit about the history of diversity, equity, and inclusion. What is diversity? What's inclusion? What's equity? And a little bit about the business case. And we'll have lots of time for a Q&A. We have a fantastic lineup of speakers for you today, and just hats off to all of these speakers who are also incredible leaders in their own communities, in their own work, and a very valuable member of the Inclusion Council at the Greater Des Moines Partnership, where they give a lot of their time and their talent in advancing diversity, equity, and inclusion in our community, but also how do we do this collectively? So we have, I didn't write his name, and that's my bad. Everybody knows you, Mr. Tim. Mr. Tim Perkins, which I will write his name here. He's the district coordinator at the Veterans, at the VA. He does a lot of work around inclusion and in the Office of Talent Management. Ms. Nang Hong is the Vice President of Mission Outreach at Girl Scouts of Greater Iowa. Mary Hunter is the President and CEO of Goodwill of Central Iowa. And last but not least, we have Erica Acosta, who is the Recruitment and Retention Program Manager at the state of Iowa. So let's give them a virtual round of applause. And let's get going with Mr. Tim, who's going to talk to us a little bit about the history of how, where it was, 1970s, 60s, and where we're at today. So Tim, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much. So I appreciate y'all being here. She already introduced me. I right now work at the VBA doing reasonable accommodations. So working with folks with disabilities to let them join the workforce or stay in the workforce. So what I wanted to kind of put in perspective for everybody is to talk about the history of diversity, equity, and inclusion. And why it matters is as you're trying to get buy-in for all of your programs, you have to understand that this is kind of an ongoing evolution. There's step forward, steps back. You'll get people who are frustrated. I'm Native American myself, and sometimes we'll say minority fatigue because, we've talked about the issues. We've tried to make change and stuff. And I think we have some good energy now and some good focus, but you have to make sure that you understand that this isn't a new fight. It's an ongoing fight to try to get to equity. And it started back in the 60s when President Kennedy first started talking about affirmative action and used that expression. Equal employment opportunity followed, and then we got to diversity and inclusion, and now we have diversity, equity, and inclusion. So as we go across this timeline, thank you for advancing that, Sanjita. In the 1960s, we had equal employment opportunity. Actually, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission got formed in 1964-65 by an executive order by President Kennedy. And what he put out was an executive order requiring anyone who was getting federal money to have equal ability for people, no discrimination in employment, pay, etc. And he called it taking affirmative actions towards equality. Now, and it eliminated, so then when the EOC got formed, we actually started tracking numbers on women and minorities within the workforce, and we started eliminating discrimination for protected classes. In the 1970s and 80s, affirmative action really got pushed, but that term was used more with education than with employment, but it still affected both. But it was always directed by federal funds. So states could do what they wanted, private employers they didn't have a lot of impact on. Discrimination, you know, you weren't supposed to discriminate, but there wasn't a huge penalty if you did, per se, or a lot of leverage they could put on you. And then in the 1990s, started promoting diversity a little bit more, and definitions got broadened and included religion, LGBTQ, different cultural backgrounds were taken into consideration. And now we get more to the present time. And besides just diversity and inclusion, they added equity, where we're trying to make sure everyone has an equal chance, has equity in their ability to move forward, get promoted, access opportunities. Okay. And there was a link made between the people you have in your workforce and your clients and the marketplace, that the more diverse your workplace is, the more diverse the clients that you'll be able to reach and advertise to. Next slide. I'm not going to say this a long time, but I wanted to show you the pattern on how things have evolved, but you also got to pay attention to the time frames. So Franklin Roosevelt in 1941 outlawed discrimination based on race, color, creed, national origin in the federal government and defense industries because he saw World War II coming. Okay, but it didn't, as we know, it didn't have a huge impact because even the military was segregated, even though it says any federal government agency won't discriminate. 1961, as I'd said, that's where we first hear about affirmative action. Lyndon B. Johnson did some prohibited employee discrimination for organizations receiving federal funds and subcontracts. And then even President Nixon established the Philadelphia Order, where he required this assistant labor secretary to require anybody who's bidden to have submit an acceptable affirmative action program with specific goals. It got extended to other cities, and the Supreme Court decided not to hear any appeals when somebody tried to fight it. Next slide. Okay, so I put out here a major milestone timeline, and we're putting this presentation with the understanding that most of the folks we're trying to reach haven't been in diversity a little bit. So we're trying to give you some good references. So some of the major milestones I talked about: 1941, they got the executive order saying that the federal government can't discriminate, but the military was segregated. But in 1949, the military was desegregated. In 1954, a big case was Brown versus the Board of Education, and that was supposed to end school segregation. It obviously did not in the South without a big fight, and went on for quite a while. In 1964, as I said, Kennedy required contractors to take affirmative action. But then in 1964, we also have the first Civil Rights Act in 1964, signed by President Johnson. In 1966, the Equal Employment Opportunity Commission, this was the first time that employers were required to report the number of women, racial and ethnic minority employees that they had. So it was an EO Form 1. But there really wasn't any consequence to it. It was just something they were monitoring. Then in 1973, for people with disabilities, the federal government signed the Rehabilitation Act, but it's kind of like the Americans with Disability Act, but it was just for federal employees. But from 1973 to 1990, when President Bush signed the Americans with Disability Act, only the federal government or people receiving federal funds had to make things accessible for people with handicaps or provide the tools they needed to do a job. So you can see the huge jump there, almost 20 years before anything else happened. And then in 1991, President Bush also signed the Civil Rights Act of 1991. What that did, excuse me, in the 1964 Civil Rights Act didn't put any kind of compensation damages, and didn't allow you to sue in certain discrimination cases. The Civil Rights Act of 1991 added some teeth to the law, basically, where you could get monetary damages too for kind of pain and suffering, discrimination, harassment, etc. Where before all you could do is maybe get back pay. So it made employers more accountable for their actions. Then we go another 20 years almost, and then President Bush signs the Americans with Disabilities Amendment Act, which added some more requirements. And what it did was broaden the definition of what a disability is. Unfortunately, the Americans with Disability Act, if you didn't have a visible disability or if it could be considered temporary, a lot of employers didn't have to take actions. The Americans with Disability Amendment Act made it so that if something affects what they consider a major life function, but it could be walking, it could be your immune system, it could be your endocrine system. So they made the non-visible disabilities covered under the Americans with Disability Act and a lot more enforcement. Next slide. Now, just talking about affirmative action and diversity, equity, and inclusion, there's setbacks all the time as we try to move forward. So I put some examples of where different states did ballot measures to get rid of affirmative action. So 1997, California bans it. 98, Washington State. As early as 2011, Arizona did it, a prohibition banning any preferential treatment. Every time one of these goes into effect, the percentage of minorities who enter colleges drops dramatically, almost in half in most cases. So, and they don't cover the employment numbers as hard, but those drop as well. So now the latest thing when we start talking about diversity, equity, inclusion is in 2021, 22 states, including Iowa, have put bills related to teaching the critical race theory. A lot of them related to the, sorry, try to remember the name of the project. I had a problem. I apologize. Sanjita, help me out. The 1619 project. There you go. They say that they don't want critical race theory taught. Basically, if it makes one group look like they're responsible for a majority of the issues, that it should not be discussed in school. They talk about pulling funding. Some specifically mention that project, but that is just a general attack to make sure that history stays a bit sanitized and we can't discuss some critical issues that have to do with employment and housing and things of those nature. Next slide. Okay, so diversity, equity, inclusion has progressed as we've moved along. So we kind of have a table here of old rules and new rules. So before, everybody was treating some of the affirmative action, EO, and even diversity as a bit of a check the box exercise. I just got to report stuff and try to meet a goal. Now it's more of a CEO level priority and considered important all through the levels of management. Before, work-life balance is considered a challenge that the employee has to deal with, not the employer doesn't have to take consideration. And now it's part of the total employee experience. Companies measure diversity through just demographics. In other words, oh, well, we have, we'll go by how many women we have, how many per se African Americans, or how many people from another country, or age. And if you met that mark, you're like, oh, I'm so successful. And just called it a day. Now we measure a little bit more, try to make sure that there's a lack of bias in all recruitment, pay, promotions, and all of the talent practices. So before, diversity only took into account gender, race, and demographic differences. And now it's more of a diversity of thought that also addresses things like autism and other cognitive differences. And then just a more of a broad context of the individual. So before, leaders are promoted on what they considered merit and experience, but it didn't take out the built-in biases that were in systems. Now, leaders are promoted on their ability to lead inclusively. How well did they do across the board instead of in small specific areas? So Diversity and inclusion used to just be a program of education, training, and a discussion. Now it's going beyond that. And it also is debiasing business processes and holding people accountable for their actions. Before, companies regularly reported progress on their measures. Now they would report it but not do anything. Now they're holding people accountable for creating an inclusive culture, and they use different metrics to compare them. So, next slide. So let's talk about diversity, inclusion, maturity. So we have a model here and a framework, and kind of wondering, and you can go in the chat and share this, where your organization might be. Now, and if you've seen some of these changes, so, are you just at compliance where basically it's just, and I'm going to summarize this really quick, compliance, are you just at a check the box exercise? You got some workplace diversification, but it's just against metrics. Is your company starting to adopt some of these business practices? They agree diversity is crucial to success. Are you inclusive and collaborative? In other words, you're bringing in some different inclusion behaviors and saying, Gita, we'll talk about those some more. But employers know that diverse opinions are valued, D&I is embedded in your culture, and cultural competency, is put through the whole organization. And then, of course, when you start seeing the strategic integration where diversity is a competitive advantage. So one example of that was way back when IBM brought in finally an African-American gentleman for sales, and their sales went up 15% because he reached markets they hadn't gotten to. So how does your company see it?
Yeah, if we can just engage a little bit in a little bit of conversation with you. I want to go back to this slide as well. We're constantly talking about the 21st century workplace, right? What we did until today is what we did, but what are we going to do to be relevant in our workplace the next 25 years? Who are our customers? Who's going to be our workers? Are you seeing some of these changes externally in your own workplaces? Feel free to unmute and share, or put it in the chat box. And then in this maturity model, and there's no shame, by the way, knowing that we are at the compliance stage and we need to do more. We're at stage B and we need to do more. And we've done this for 30 years and we're at the strategic integration stage. That's all good. So feel free to put that in your chat. We're just curious to hear where people are at, where companies are at in this maturity model. We saw one person say we're at a foundational level. Anybody else would like to add?
Say if you're probably not sure, you're probably at the foundational, because if you haven't heard a lot about it, to know where you're at, they're probably at foundational. So, and keep in mind through this whole session, ask questions whenever you want. One of us will jump in. This is your chance, if you don't know a lot about it, to ask those questions you may have wanted to ask. So, somebody put strategic. That's good.
That is good. Kristen, would you want to also put in, Crystal, sorry, would you want to also put in where you work at? That's really good. And we can learn from each other. And that's the whole point of our biggest trust. That's awesome. Anybody else before we move on to our next? Okay.
If you think of any other questions, again, feel free to put them in the chat and we'll answer them as best we can. And I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Han.
Good afternoon. So as Tim was mentioning about diversity, I wanted to ask everyone what comes to mind when you hear the word diversity. If you want to unmute or type it in the chat, we'd love to hear some of your feedback. All right, so it looks like we have different perspectives, people from different cultures, walks of life experiences, also things that makes us different from others. Perfect. All right. So when I think of diversity, I think of the magical of baking a cake. I do apologize, I cannot send everyone a piece of cake right now to eat during this presentation. So just try your best to imagine it all. To start off, though, the official definition of diversity is the condition of having or being composed of differing elements. So when you think of a cake, you have, depending on what cake, of course, but let's say we are baking a generic cake. We need flour, we need egg, we need butter, and each of those ingredients play a very important role. If you have too much butter, the cake can flop. You have too many eggs, the cake can be too fluffy. So it's really a play on how those ingredients integrate with each other to form, that masterpiece of a dessert. So in a workplace context, diversity encompasses a range of similarities and differences that each individual brings, including but not limited to national origin, language, race, color, disability, ethnicity, gender, age, religion, sexual orientation, gender identity, social economic status, veteran status, and family structures. So this is a grouping of a couple of examples of what a diverse work environment or work culture looks like. I want to take a pause real quick and ask everyone to just take a moment to reflect on your current company right now, your current workplace, or your immediate team that you're working with, and just kind of reflect on those around you. Does it match up with some of these images in here? Do we have all male on the C-suite, a mix of men and women? Do we have people from a variety of different backgrounds, ethnic backgrounds, experiences, years of, in specific sectors of the workforce? Just kind of think about those around you right now. All right, we can advance on to the next slide. So when we're talking about diversity, we understand, like everyone's been mentioning, different cultures, differences in positive and what we bring. How does that, indicate, like, how does it impact our workplace environment and our business and overall, ROI? When we have a diverse workforce or a team, we have different opportunities to really exchange those unique perspectives, spark ideas. So you might have someone with years of experiences. Let's get back to cake now. We have someone who has years of experiences baking specific, a specific type of cake. They want to open a business. They don't have the skill set in accounting. They don't have the skill set in customer management, social media, all of that. We need a team of people. We need a team of people with a variety of different ways of thinking, experiences, strengths, and also, opportunities to really play together. And that's where those opportunities come from. Appeal and connect to a wider target market. So as Tim mentioned earlier, with the case of IBM, they had a specific staff member come in and he was able to appeal to a wider market. Representation really matters within a workplace environment, especially when you are dealing with consumers. There is that connection. It is that sense of belonging that we all seek. When we're at a networking event, we're always looking for someone with that mutual connection, whether it's football, golf, pizza, whatever it is. And you play on those connections and you really build that relationship. So same idea here with diversity in the workforce. Also, a better understanding of consumer needs and how to fulfill them. Again, if you're going to approach me and ask me about golf, I will not have a clue. But if you're able to relate to me on cake, I can more than happy to extend that conversation. Increase employee morale, boost productivity, retention, and overall company culture. So I don't know where everyone is at their point of careers right now, but if you reflect on an employer that you've had before, think about the employers who you were loyal to. What did they do that was different? What did they value? And also taking a look at, if you know that your employer cares about you as an individual, respects your culture, your background, your skill set, you'll most likely, put forth a better effort and also, be happier in your position. And then another point would be it fights unconscious bias. When you have a variety of different people being able to contribute in multiple perspectives, you just, you're able to kind of balance that point. So to give a very Iowan example, you might, let's say if we had a committee of 10 Cyclones sitting in the room to plan a Cy-Hawk game, or to provide, feedback on how the ref calls were made. Do you think that we'll have some unconscious bias? I'm pretty sure we will. So all in all, what I want to conclude with for diversity would be diversity does not stick without inclusion, which before I hand it off to my colleague Erica, I wanted to stop there to see what questions or comments does anyone have for the term diversity. All right, then we will move on to inclusion on how diversity all forms.
Okay, so inclusion is the act of including, the process of including all types of people in the group or team by recognizing that differences are an asset. So everyone wants to be included, right? Diversity means is being invited to the party. Inclusion is being asked to dance, right? Everybody has those moments that they remember, right? So think of a time when you were included. And then think of a time when you were excluded and how that made you feel. Inclusion goes beyond simply placing employees that are diverse. It involves placing emphasis on communication and involving everyone within the organization. So next slide, please. So an inclusive workplace doesn't just have a diversity of people present. It has a diversity of people involved, developed, empowered, and trusted by the business. You need to create that safe space when vulnerability is not only accepted, but celebrated. People feel that they can be their authentic selves and have a sense of belonging. Put your mission in writing. Get your entire team involved and establish a dedicated program or committee. Make sure that your leadership is on board and involved and even part of these programs, whether it's leading the programs or being a sponsor of these committees. Just make sure that they're involved from the top down, right? And then start with your recruiting process. Obviously being a recruiter myself, this is an important piece. So when you're recruiting, make sure that you're writing inclusive job descriptions. And by that, I mean, the language that you're using in your postings, right? Make sure that that everyone understands what they mean. Don't be using acronyms or company specific terminology that people wouldn't understand. And then of course, widen your search areas. Where are you placing those job ads? Involve diverse groups of people in the hiring process, in your interview teams. And then of course, the benefit of that is just you're widening your talent pool, you're finding those new and different perspectives, more innovation and creative solutions can develop from collaboration of diverse groups of people. And then focus on culture adds, not just culture fits. Hire people that resonate within your mission, who have a desire to get and keep that ball rolling on your inclusion initiatives. So inclusion in the workplace means having a voice, a sense of belonging, feeling valued and collaborative environment. So if you think back to the cake analogy, right? Do you have all the ingredients to make a successful cake, right? To make that great tasting cake? Do you have all the ingredients to make your company successful, to make your business successful? All right, next slide. So this is an example of the CIA's mission on diversity. And I'm just going to read this to you because it's really, really good. So at the CIA, we are striving to build a workforce that reflects the world in which we live and a workplace where all voices are heard, respected, and valued. Our national security mission demands a broad range of perspectives, ethnicities, backgrounds, and experiences. We've seen how an inclusive culture fosters new ideas, inspires innovation, and leads to success. At CIA, we don't just leverage diversity, equity, and inclusion, we embrace it and celebrate it. CIA must attract, develop, and retain a diverse workforce to ensure success in an increasingly complex global environment. By ensuring that every CIA officer is able to bring a full range of perspectives, experiences, and talents to our mission, the agency will be better prepared to address intelligence challenges and support its customers. That's pretty amazing. That's pretty powerful.
Awesome. Thank you, Erica. We'll move on to the next one, but I just wanted to interrupt briefly and ask folks if they have any thoughts around this. I was I'm pretty impressed with it because CIA, thinking of the work of CIA, they have to tackle global issues, right? Something that's happening in Afghanistan, Japan at any given time. What would happen if they didn't have an inclusive culture where they were able to attract people from different nationalities, different cultures, different ethnicities, made them feel belonged, and allow them to really be their full selves at work. So thank you for sharing that. I think this is really great. Any other thoughts from anyone before we move on to the next section? All right, please continue to put your thoughts in the chat. We love hearing how you're feeling, what's going on in your mind, or if you have any additional thoughts. So we'll move on to the next section here.
Oh, hey, Sanjita, it's Tim.
Yes.
Sorry. We had a Mr. Hoffman, or sorry, I shouldn't. Yeah, he's got him. Charles Hoffman brought up there. He was talking about a new employee appreciated them using pronouns in their signature lines, and then also his company's thinking about adding a diversity statement to their jobs postings. So I don't know if he's comfortable sharing a little bit of that or not. So completely up to him. Oh, Charles. Nope. Well, we can go ahead. I don't want to put him on the spot if he's not comfortable.
That's all right. We can come to it at the end as well. So, all right, Mary, you're up.
Thanks, Sanjita. Transitioning only slightly into the word equity. And what comes to mind when we say the word equity? It's a word that we've been using quite a bit. So as we continue the theme of putting things in the chat, feel free to put words into the chat. What comes to mind when you say the word equity? But one of the things, Sanjita, if you go on to the next slide, one of the things we want to clarify is equity doesn't mean equality. Equality refers to uniform distribution of resources and opportunities, and you're going to see that as a visual here in a second. Equity, on the other hand, is about fair treatment, access, opportunity, and advancement for all employees. You know, a couple other things here on the slide that we felt were relevant is most of us, if not all of us, have heard the golden rule. Treat people how you would like to be treated. But how many of you have heard of the platinum rule? I hadn't. Treat people how they want you to treat them. Just let that set in for just a minute. The platinum rule, treat people how they want you to treat them. Looking at a visual, this kind of sums it up pretty easily, I think. Equality is the top section of this slide where you look at the different people and bicycles. Equality is giving everybody a bike. Everybody gets a bike. Equity is everybody gets a bike that fits them. The tools to be successful. We all need different tools. Your tools and my tools might not be the same in the same job role. So equity is getting everybody the right tools to be successful. Another visual is this ballpark visual, and it's adding justice to the whole conversation, going from reality, equality, equity, and justice. Again, reality is, as you see it on the picture, some have more than others. Equality, okay, we'll just make sure everybody has the same box, size box. We'll make everybody has the same size bicycle. And it's just, equity is, okay, we're going to give each person what they need to be successful. And then of course, justice is just breaking down all the barriers altogether. And so where are you in your company, in your organization? What stage are you at? Do you look at this when you look at your employees trying to do their jobs? Are you providing them the tools to be successful? And then we'll just wrap it up to see what's been put in the chat box with regard to inequity. I put some things on the slide that came to mind that I thought were quick, easy hitters, but are there other things in the chat box that have been bouncing through while we've been going through the slides? I just see Timothy put up promotion. I'll see if I can't see if there are others. Justice is breaking down the visuals. I can't tell if there are other comments. Feel free to unmute yourself, or please feel free to add comments to the chat of examples of inequity. We've been trying to get the group to participate. We've been doing this throughout the whole presentation, so feel free to hop in at any time. Laws, there's one. Okay.
Awesome. All right. Thank you, Mary. Gonna just switch over here in my screen real quick. Give me a second. All right.
Sanjita, it looks like Charles said he would be free to, he would speak up if we wanted him to talk.
Yeah. Are you available, Charles?
I am. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Hi, Sanjita. How are you?
Good. Good to see you.
Good to see you too. Yeah. So Goodwill of Central Iowa has really, over the last probably 3 to 6 months, we really are pushing this kind of diversity, equity, and inclusion. I don't want to call it an initiative because it's something that has to happen. We have to do this because it's the right thing to do. But looking at everything that we do through the lens of DE&I. So, you know, we're having really thoughtful talks and conversations and discussions about how we can kind of move the needle here at Goodwill of Central Iowa, understanding that it's a process and it's change, and you know, how do we move forward with that? So, you know, we're starting out with things like slowly adding, you know, our pronouns to our email signatures, and introducing ourselves with our pronouns, so we're visible that way. Other things like I will be attending the Certified Diversity Professional course, so making sure that we have at least one individual here that has a really good understanding of diversity, equity, and inclusion. It's also equity in pay. So for most of you that may have seen, Goodwill's leadership team took on a really huge lift, and we've lifted up a lot of our employees with a $15 minimum wage. So we understand that we're pulling people out of the margins with that raise. So it's doing a lot of things that we weren't doing before, and understanding, you know, that we're progressing, and through the process we're, you know, allowing people grace as we kind of proceed.
Awesome. Well, thank you for sharing that, Charles. All of us are in this journey, right? So I always say a good time to plant a tree was 10 years ago, but another good time to plant a tree is right now, right today. Because guess what? 10 years later, that tree is going to be big, and it's going to give shade, and it's going to fulfill its purpose, right? So there is never a bad time to start thinking about this work. There's never a bad time to start an initiative. So with that, I am going to jump into the next session and talking about why. Why are we talking about this? Why do we need to talk about this? Just making sure I see the chat, Molly. I don't know why my chat box doesn't open. Can you read the chat if it's relevant for me to? Okay, thank you. All right, so we're going to talk a little bit about the business case, and a lot of times, you know, if you're an advocate, no matter where you're sitting in the organization, if you're a leader leading this work, if you're at the top level, at the medium level, and if you're just being a champion, we need all of them, right? We need the top level folks to understand that this is important and lead from the top. We need people everywhere in the organization to understand the need for this and the benefits of this. So thank you for being here. You can be a champion no matter where you sit in the organization, and an advocate no matter where you sit in an organization. Because a lot of times, until now, sometimes we have thought about the DEI work as just a nice thing to do and an add-on. And in the 21st century, it just cannot be. It cannot be an add-on. It cannot be an afterthought. It's a very important strategic business intervention. It's a business imperative, right? And why is that? So we're gonna equip you with some of these reasonings. So if you need to sell this in your organization, within your organization, you have the tools and some equipment to say that, you know, have the business case. Because the moral argument is all great, it's fine, nothing wrong with that, but that alone is not going to lead us to success. So we're gonna give you some very specific tools to have in your toolbox to figure out the business case and why we need to do DEI work, and why it needs to be that strategic intervention level, as we saw in that chart before. So one of the key reasons is, again, if you saw in the maturity chart, there are laws that we need to comply with, period, right? But that's the minimum that we can do and we should do. And that's what lots of companies did until today. But now, as we saw in the progression of Tim's slide, that as we bring on more people, that is not always going to be good if we don't understand each other, if we've not created that space where everybody can feel included. We all have different parts of our lives and ourselves that we cannot, I say, check out at the door before you quote unquote get to work. We bring our whole selves to work. Whether I have a mental disability, whether I have a physical disability, whether I'm dealing with cancer, no matter what it is, whether I have an accent in my English, whether I'm an immigrant, no matter what, whether I'm an older worker, younger worker, no matter who I am, I have to bring my whole self to work. And guess what? Lots of you do too. But am I gonna be accepted? Am I gonna be involved? And I'm gonna be welcomed? Will my ideas be taken, right? Those are things that we have to proactively work to make sure that the cake mix that we have mixed together to make the best cake, to make the best use of all of our human potential to give to our companies and our workforce, which is what our employers want. And so complying to the US laws is just one part of it. You can think about preventing lawsuits, legal fees, and brand value in the long term. If you go to the EEOC website today, you will see a long list of EEOC complaints, and a long list of employers who are still not getting this right, and a long list of employers who are still losing money and brand value in the long term. You don't want to be that, right? You don't want your company's name to be on the newspaper for doing something wrong tomorrow. And that's why we need to be in the front end of it. We need to be ahead of this. So we're going to talk a little bit more about changing demographics, globalization, and how we can actually use this as a competitive advantage. So just an example, you know, even companies who are doing Walmart, if you look at Walmart, they have a very robust DEI program, but yet they still falter, right? So it's an ongoing journey. It should not, prevent us from doing more work. Sometimes people get afraid of doing the right thing and saying the right thing, and they just don't do it. And guess what? That's not the right approach. That will not lead us to success. It's not going to solve it on its own. I remember this Abercrombie case very, very clearly, just in 2015, where a female wearing a hijab was denied a job because she didn't really fit in the culture or the perception of what an Abercrombie salesperson looks like, right? To Erica's point, she said, don't look for culture fit, look for culture add, right? And so the term culture fit is in fact a code word to say you're not welcomed here, you don't belong here, you're not gonna thrive here. And we don't want to create a workplace for some people, because guess what? We're going to be losing the talent of so many people that could bring so much talent in our organization. So this is just an example. You have all heard over and over that our demographics in our community is changing. It's changing in a big time, right? So this slide shows the gradual progression of increment of Black, Latino, Asian population in the United States between 1970 and 2016. And when you look at the projected growth by racial groups between 2015 and 2060, there is only one racial group whose population is not growing. In fact, it is declining. And that's the population of white people. And I don't want you to be alarmed. There's still a lot of white people around us. The thing I want you to take away from this slide is, if you're a business who have always relied on that pool of candidates for your workforce to market your products and services, are we going to be relevant in the next 25 to 30 years? Do we still have people working for us? Do we still have a market, right? If we're not marketing our products and services in these growing populations and constituents, are we losing out? If we're a for-profit organization, I always say, whose money are you leaving at the table? Are you not marketing to Black people, Asian people, older people, disability people, because you think they don't have the purchasing capacity or you don't know how to reach out to them? Think about the lost value. Like having people, do they work for you? If they work for you, there's potentially you can reach out to those customers, right? I really don't have to talk a lot about globalization. In fact, I want to go back to this slide because I missed adding a slide around our different generations in the workforce. It's not just race and ethnicity that is changing in the workforce. We have now 5 generations of people working in the workforce in the first time of our history, right? And millennials are projected to be 75% of our workforce by 2025. Think about that for a moment. Do we know how to attract millennials in our workforce? Do we know how to keep them? Do we know what they want from their employers? And gone are those days really when employers are really always interviewing employees, right? Today's potential employees are actually doing a lot of research around companies and asking you tough questions during interviews. Do you value racial equity? Do you value climate change? Do you have a recycling program in your organization? Things like that are going to be important in the next generation of workforce. Are we being adaptive? Do we know how to bring them on board and keep them and allow them to be super productive and get what we want from them, right? So globalization is just a thing of the 21st century. Sorry, I have to admit someone here. We know that if your company is global, we need to understand the language and political systems, cultural norms, laws, values, and social structures of those countries to successfully do business with them. Again, coming back to the CIA statement, I think CIA is such a company that it has to work globally, and they have to have an understanding of the global environment, the laws, the language, the cultural cues, and so forth. So I think it's any given product, an iPhone, like 5 different parts coming in 5 different, being developed in 5 different countries. In your own agencies and institutions, there's probably something that we rely on a global supply chain, which we all got to know how complex it is and in how it disrupted the market last year. And so just, a couple of other key bullet points here. 82% of global HR leaders believe that the war for talent is going to be a key issue over the next 10 years. I'm pretty sure all of you have seen news articles over and over. We have a talent shortage. We have a talent shortage, right? And so the question is, are we looking at all the pools of talent that are untapped? Are we looking at the disability group of talent? Are we looking at returning citizens? Are we looking at African Americans? Are we looking at veterans? And are we trying to tap into that talent that are work ready right here in our backyard, we're just not really looking at them. The unconscious bias comes into play. Oh, maybe they're not going to be a good fit for us. We shouldn't really assume, right? We have to be intentional about making sure that the workplace can bring everybody and allow everybody to thrive. And so 75% of employees who experience unfairness will, we all have worked somewhere, like one of our speakers already talked about, that was non-fair and not welcoming. And so what do we do? We truly pass on message to 7 other people. 67% of LGBTQ people believe it's important to work for a company that has equality and diversity policies. So these are all talent attraction measures. In 2009, when we had the recession, diverse companies outperformed peers 4 times. And companies in the top quartile for racial and ethnic diversity are 35% more likely to have financial returns. And there are some companies who do this ongoing research. McKinsey, Deloitte, Brookings Institute. So these are from these statistics are from those organizations. So again, the case for inclusive culture says, my previous speakers talked about. It seems like a buzzword anymore. Like, hey, we got to do diversity. We have to have an inclusive culture. And we're trying to have the mindset change from it's a nice thing to do, just really showing the value, true value. We talk about ROI, the return on investment, right? Now we're going to have to change the culture and language to ROI as in return on inclusion. What do we really get when we have and build an inclusive workforce? Right? We've all worked, to Nung's point, I really loved what Nung said earlier. We've all worked at a workplace or at some point in our life where we have felt disengaged from the employer because you didn't feel valued, you didn't feel welcomed. What did you do? I would love to hear in the chat box. Have you ever worked in a place or been in a situation where you didn't feel valued, where you didn't feel welcomed, and you felt disengaged? I'd love to see some. Please tell me I'm not the only one. So Gallup did a study, and Gallup found that very small, about 25% employees are actually really engaged at the workplace. And a majority of them are just getting by and about 25% people are actively disengaged. So what does that do to your productivity? Think about that time when you were working for an organization where you didn't feel valued, where you didn't feel belonged. What happened to you? What happened to me was I was not able to give my best. If I was able to perform well, I would give A+, 10 hours of my time, and I would really be productive. So what happens is it impacts, at the end of the day, it impacts productivity. And as employers, that's not what we want. We don't want unproductive employees. We want employees who feel excited to come to work, who come to work every day, who feel belonged, who feel welcomed, and who are giving 100% of their human potential to us every single day, right? So again, McKinsey has done this research and Deloitte has done these research over and over, and they found that inclusive companies are twice as likely to meet or exceed financial targets. They're 3 times as likely to be high performing and 6 times more likely to be innovative and agile. So what I talk about, when I talk about innovation, I always think about a scenario. Think about a scenario that you're in a meeting and you have a great idea, but you don't feel comfortable sharing. Or if you're leading the meeting, there's somebody sitting in and doesn't feel comfortable sharing. What would happen if that was a really great idea? That was could be $1 million idea. We just got it out of the door. We didn't get it, right? And so that's how we lose productivity. That's how we lose innovation. There's a story about, my favorite story, innovation story is about Frito-Lay, Flaming Hot Cheetos. I don't know how many of you have heard it. So the idea of Flaming Hot Cheetos at Frito-Lay's actually came from a worker who was a janitor in the company of a Mexican origin and Hispanic origin. And so he put his idea in the ideas box and said, you know, we love Cheetos, but you know what? It would be great if it was really spicy. I love spicy food. I have a whole community of culture of people who love spicy food. And so he put the idea down. And he was actually, the vice president of the company actually talked to him. And now we know that Frito-Lay, the Flaming Hot Cheetos is a highly marketable product that brought billions of dollars to the company. It actually gave birth to a whole slew of other flaming hot snack items. So that's a really great story about inclusion, where just by having someone in the organization who eats differently, who thinks differently, who's from a different culture, he was able to give a product idea to tap into a new market that had not been tapped before, right? But the other part of the inclusion story in this story is that the idea was actually taken, even no matter who he was in the organization. They didn't say, oh, we don't take ideas from the janitor level. The ideas, innovative ideas, can come only from senior level. What would have happened if that was the culture in the organization, right? And so that's the story that resonates with me. Another story of innovation is from Campbell Soup, where there were actually 3 females who were working and who were very health conscious. And so they actually came up with the line of the health conscious, I believe it's called Harvest line of products. And so again, this is the power of inclusion. This is the power of having diverse workforce. This is the power of having different thoughts and different ideas at the table to increase the bottom line of the company. So I'm going to pause there and see if we have any comments or questions. There is at least one chat that I didn't get to see. So you get discouraged and burnt out, and that's absolutely right. Any other comments or questions so far? I want to take a quick pause because I feel like I'm kind of talking at you and I want to be talking with you. Anything? Anybody? Should we keep moving on? Okay. All right. I think we're coming very close to the end of our slides here. So again, I think I've talked about McKinsey doing research for a really long time, and now we have empirical evidence that having a diverse workforce at all levels, by the way, at not just one level, at senior level, at the boardroom, that we really can lead to higher financial returns, can lead to more productivity, can lead to more innovation. So I think this is the summarizing slide that really, inclusion and diversity boils down to attraction of talent, retention of talent, to get the best talent. Again, like I said, we have to think about the future of our workforce. What do we look like in the next 25 years? What does our talent pool look like in the next 25 years? Are we ready for it? They're going to be younger. They're going to be more connected. They're more mobile, more digital natives. How do they work? They want to be. They want to work remotely. They want flexibility, and flexibility looks completely different to them. So do we have a blanket statement policy that everybody is doing blah, which is everybody's working from home or everybody's working in the office? Is that going to work for us in the next 25 years? Will we keep losing people? So it really boils down to being able to attract the best talent. It boils down to making sure every person feels welcomed and every person feels like they can be their best. Just because I am put an X, right? I'm an immigrant. My English is not the best. I'm a mom. I am a single parent. I'm a caregiver. Think about anything. Just because I'm this, I still can go to my workplace and feel included. I feel understood. I feel supported. I'm going to give my 100% to my work, right? I'm going to be creative, innovative, and productive. And then again, that leads to your reputation and responsibility. Again, there's a really big war again in the community about which company is doing better in the environmental sustainability, in doing being equality and justice and all of that. And really, at the end, it boils down to financial performance, which I think we talked about how we have empirical evidence now that having a diverse workforce does lead to better financial performance. So I kind of talked about some of these examples already of innovation, so I'm going to skip that. And that is truly the end of our presentation here. And you've been silent, so we would love to hear from you. I'm just going to talk quickly about the next session. If you're in the stage of figuring out, starting this journey, right? How do you design a DEI strategy? What does a good DEI strategy look like? What are some key considerations and steps to be taken? Do we have an integrated strategy with our own business strategy? All companies have strategic plans. Do we have DEI goals in there? How do we measure progress? So these are things we will be covering in the next session on August 26th. So please feel free to block that time, but I will stop my screen share and invite everybody to share anything, what you learned from today. If you have questions, we're in the journey, or anything that you've done that you would like to share. This is not just a safe space. I will say that this is a brave space where we can talk about difficult topics and difficult things. And so I welcome you all to engage in that conversation.
Sanjita, I was going to say, to reinforce that, the biggest problem in diversity is, number one, how to start, because it seems overwhelming. Number two, all the stuff you have to cover, people are scared to ask about because they're so afraid they'll ask the wrong way or say something bad. And this is a space where you have a lot of diversity professionals that can answer that question or help guide you along, or, even put fears to rest, and then sharing ideas. Like one I got from somebody that I added to a new employee orientation slide was, are there any particular days that are important in your culture that we need to take into consideration or provide you time off? Because everything's based on the Christian calendar here. But if you're Jewish, there's Ramadan, there's Hali, there's, I hope I said that right. If I slaughter some of your holiday names, I'm sorry, but like I'm Native, going to the powwow is a big deal. Those are days I might want. And I don't want to burn all my personal days. But at the same time, we found people that will work those holidays. Everybody else majority wants off. So as a trade-off, you're coming in on Christmas at the hospital and we'll give you off, whatever day is important to you. Oh, you're still muted, Sanjita.
I'm sorry. No, I think those are all great questions, and it's a progression, right? I think we have to start somewhere, and we can start small. So that's the part we're going to talk about in the next session, and how do we start, what questions we ask. So not going to give a lot away, but I think one of the key things it's not going to solve on its own. It's not going to grow organically, okay? We're not automatically going to know, oh, what is Tim celebrating today? And how can I be sensitive? It's not going to happen. We just have to be intentional. I always say that people are the heart of our businesses. Sometimes businesses tend to forget that. If we don't have people, we don't have a business. If Tim, Mary, Joe, Sanjita is not coming to work every day and not bringing my full self to work and not being productive, you are losing out as an employer. Well, that's not what you want. And that's why you need to be in the front end of it and say, how can I make sure I understand everything about Tim and the likes, pick it. It's going to take a lifetime. We're going to talk, there's the thing about diversity we talked about. Sometimes people think of diversity as race and ethnicity and the color of skin. It's way beyond that, right? We talk about a diversity iceberg. You can see certain things about me. You can see I'm a female. You can see some people may be confused, but some people may think you can figure out my race and my ethnicity. But the thing that's inside of me that I actually bring every day and I cannot check out at the table, at the door before coming to my work, You know, am I dealing with a personal issue? Do I have a drug addiction? Do I have somebody in my family who's dealing with cancer? Am I feeling stressed out because of that? Last year, like, do we have school problems? Do we have virus problem? What were we dealing with? How can we say, Mary, how are you doing today? What is getting on the way of you being 100% productive? You know, knowing that I cannot solve your problem that you're dealing with, addiction or cancer, but Mary thinking, knowing that I'm there as an employer to support Mary. Mary, maybe you should take one day off, you know, take an hour off. What Mary is going to come back 200% more productive tomorrow. If Mary's dealing with an issue and she's not being productive in her desk, why sit in the desk and have a lose-lose situation? How can we create a situation where, say, Mary, just go home. You know, Mary's going to be 200% productive tomorrow when she comes back. She's going to be more refreshed and recharged, right? That takes process, it takes time, and it doesn't. We have to start somewhere, and it's just a progression. And we're going to talk more about how to get senior level buy-in. What are some of the key questions we need to ask? What are some of the strategic objectives and goals that we should have in the workplace, and how do we measure them? And learning together is a key part of it. And we have to have DEI learnings together in the workplace. We cannot have one unconscious bias training a year, and that was not going to fix our DEI problems. That's not going to allow me to know everything that I need to know about Tim, and how do I address Tim if his pronouns were they. You know, what does it mean to have you know, a benefit policy for transgender resurgery, or what surgery, or things of that nature, right? How do we have parental leave? There's so many things, but I think it's a process. We need to start somewhere. All right, there's something. We're looking at employee handbook, use more, yep, Kristen. Seems like a small, yep. Yep, yes. I will drop a link to the certificate program in just a minute, but yes, so we did that also, looking at our employee handbook. And the first thing that I saw glaring at me was everything in the handbook says he and she. So if you had a person joining the organization who had a they pronoun, and welcome to our workplace, Tim. This is your first day. Here's your employee handbook. Tim's looking at the work handbook and like, oops, I don't see myself here, right? There is no they pronoun used anywhere. Oh, I don't know. Do I feel longer? Will I last here? That's the first impression. So there are other things that you could do, but that's one learning we personally had, just even in the last year, that the most handbooks and most forms, for that matter, always have he and she. So it's a small step. Continue the progression.
Yeah, I was going to say, Sanjita, you know, one of the things that stops people in diversity too is, you know, in the Army, we used to call it overanalysis paralysis. You just think about everything that you've got to do and you just shut down. You're not going to please everybody. You're going to miss a handbook that doesn't have inclusive language. You're going to miss a holiday, or you're going to leave somebody out accidentally. I mean, it's not about trying to please everybody. It's one of those, hey, we're trying to reach everybody, and people feel uncomfortable to say, hey, what about this? You know, or we could do this, or we could do that. So, and I'll give you an example of thinking outside the box, because I was big in diversity. The government had a program where if you joined the military and you were a resident alien, a lot of people know it as a green card. You can be in the States, you know, but you don't have your citizenship yet. You have to apply for it. You join the military. As soon as you got done with basic training, you got fast tracked during basic training, and at the end, you got your citizenship. Well, for the National Guard, that was huge, because that population is trying to find a way, number one, to save the thousands of dollars to get to their citizenship, you know, to get through the screening, all that stuff. And this got streamlined down to, you know, really 3 months, you know. But if you grew up in Iowa or a U.S. citizen, being an immigrant is not even a market you're thinking about, you know, so somebody has to bring it up. So, so everybody out there, if you are having kind of overanalysis paralysis, or you're scared, just reach out to us. That's what we're here for. we'll start you with the baby steps. And Sanjita's really good at letting you know where to start. Don't let it scare you or overwhelm you. So.
Yeah, thank you for that, Tim. And again, it can come from anywhere in the organization, and you can be a champion. If you're sitting at the top, great. If you're not, you can still be a champion and internally ask questions. What are we doing about this? And I also encourage all of you to think about your own diversity story. And some of you may be thinking, do I have one? I would challenge you. Everybody has a diversity story, okay? It could be just, I have a friend who is disabled and I've seen this happen to him or her day. My best friend is Black and I've grown up with him or her day. And this is a real life example from someone who is a coworker here. Every time we travel together, he got pulled, I didn't. And I have to question why. It could just be, last year I observed George Floyd being murdered for no reason. And I watched Ahmaud Arbery, who was just jogging and he got killed. It could be anything. And I got really thinking about, would that happen to me as a white person, or this or that? And everybody has a diversity story. Think of one that you can relate to. It could be your parents, your elderly parents dealing with something. It could be anything. It just it takes a little bit of time to figure out and why you are interested in doing this work and how you can be a better advocate and champion for this. Mary?
I was just giggling because as you were talking about this, I'm emailing our HR director. We need to look at our handbook. So yeah, we do. We have to start. Everybody has to start somewhere. So great stuff.
Anyone else? What are we thinking? I know we can probably give you a few minutes, a gift of time back to you, precious time, because looks like we're going to wrap up a little early, but we would love to hear from some of you who haven't shared anything. Where are you at? Do you want to be an influencer, a champion? Are you want to lead DEI? The certificate program link I dropped. If you are interested in being that person internally in your organization who wants to dig a little deeper, and that will help you. That I've been through both of the programs, the Certified Diversity Professional and Certified Diversity Executive. I'm happy to go through the program information with anybody who's thinking about it. It will just allow you to have a very, very deeper understanding of all of these DEI topics, how to be an advocate, how to be a champion, how to have a robust DEI strategy, how to measure. So take a look at that, but would love to hear from someone who hasn't shared anything. It's Mary and then Joe.
Okay, Sanjita, just to piggyback off of that, as you're sharing that link, I'm just wondering if, as people are responding with wanting to participate, if maybe a group could have a group study together or something. You would probably know who everybody is, and maybe that might be kind of a nice offering. I don't know.
Yeah, no, that is our next step. So I'm creating a closed LinkedIn group of all the folks who are enrolled in the program. The learning management system allows you to network with each other, number one. Number two, we're going to do that LinkedIn closing group, and we're going to have a community of practice. And I would love in the long term for all of us to be in touch, and maybe you will facilitate other conversations. We'll come together on a regular basis to discuss, this is what I'm dealing with. How did you deal with that? Like, I'm looking for a speaker on this. Who has any contacts, right? Those kinds of things. So great suggestion, Mary. Thank you. Joe?
I just like the comment, about being intentional with everything and just trying to cover, and for people just to talk about some of the issues that they're having. So somebody put in there about frustration and getting burned out. Those are the kind of things that you can talk to with this group. This group has some resources through Sanjita, through everybody. And then it was relayed by you, Sanjita, and also by Marvin about the certificate program is available to anybody, right? And so all the steps that you take, no matter what, with the handbook and everything, all these are steps in your journey. And this is what we wanted to address. Where are you having the issues? Where do you need a little bit of help with and everything? And so I think this is really, really good. And it's good dialogue and everything and to not feel like when you're participating that if you ask something that you're going to be like that, like, why haven't you done it yet? It's not about that. It's about how can we get there? How can we help? Where are you at? What have you done? let's work this together to kind of guide you.
Yep. Thanks for adding that, Joe. Tim?
Yeah, no, I was just going to add kind of on what Joe says is, you don't know what you don't know. And that's the biggest thing in diversity. That's okay. Or Jack Bryson just put in, most people never realize blacks over 60 actually lived in segregation, even in Des Moines. Most think it was 100 years ago, not realizing about redlining. And if you're not familiar with what redlining is, there's another class. The biggest example, the most recent one is like Juneteenth has been around forever. A lot of groups knew about it, but a lot of groups didn't. And then suddenly now it's a big, it's like, oh, there's a Juneteenth. You don't know what you don't know and what people didn't share. And as you do this diversity training and put it in your corporation, you might find out about opportunities. Like Juneteenth's a good time to go reach out to a whole community to market your product or sponsor something, do some good. So, so you got to feel free to discuss some stuff and get a diversity program together. That's the other sideline benefit. And the other point I'll make is don't leave anybody behind. I'm probably the biggest advocate to say diversity includes white people.
Yes.
Don't leave them behind.
Yes.
Make sure they feel valued too and not blamed for some reason. That's another big one as well.
That's really a great point, Tim. I was sitting in a roundtable conversation where from a very big employer, I heard somebody say, white men have come to me and said, where is my ERG, right? And I said, if we are leaving somebody out, we're not doing a good job. White males, white people are very, very, very important part of the conversation and the solution. And we all need to be working together, and there's a really intentional and great way to bring people together. So that's a really great point. So I know we don't need to stretch this out longer, but again, I really want to hear one last, time from anybody who hasn't heard. If you don't feel like, unmuting or coming on camera, but putting something on the chat, we'd love to hear. Where are you at in the journey? Are you beginning? Are you in the middle? Are you in the advanced stages? Do you want to be an advocate? Do you be a champion? Do you want to be are you a leader? So we'd love to hear some of that in the chat, and we'd love for you to come to our next session and tell your colleagues about our next session. We will talk about strategies. So any last takers, any last comments or questions from anyone? I want to thank all of our panelists today who are also amazing volunteers and leaders in our community. So thank you again, and thank you for everyone for being here, and hopefully see you next month.